There are two distinct kinds of quiet daughters raised in every family home. There are the ones whose silence is born of total obedience, and there are the ones whose silence is a carefully guarded archive of memory. Parents, as a general rule, cannot tell the two apart, not until an inevitable morning comes when a thick manila folder is slid quietly across a sunny kitchen table, the daughter lifts her clear eyes, and the mother understands, with sudden, terrible clarity, which kind of child she actually raised. My name is Quinn Everett. I had just turned 18 years old, and by 9:03 a.m. the very next morning, my mother was sliding a heavy paper folder across our laminate kitchen counter like it was a side order of breakfast toast. She offered me her sweet, rehearsed, women's committee smile and said, "Honey, we need to have a little talk about that money." The blood inside my veins instantly ran ice cold. What she had absolutely no idea of was that I already knew every single word written inside those papers. To truly understand how our quiet kitchen turned into a battlefield, I have to take you back 6 months before that April morning, back to a chilly Tuesday in October, before my family discovered the true nature of the silence I had maintained for years. It was the kind of crisp autumn afternoon, where the yellow porch lights click on automatically by 5 p.m. I was sitting in my second-floor bedroom, slowly tidying up my desk, when my eyes fell upon my grandfather's old cedar box sitting on the top shelf. Grandpa Harold had handed it to me on my 17th birthday, the very last gift he ever personally placed into my hands before he passed away. I hadn't summoned the courage to lift the lid in months. When I finally pulled it down and opened it, the brass hinges let out a soft, dry whisper. Inside lay a pressed, dark red maple leaf from the yard behind his old farm, a faded color photograph of him and Grandma Margaret holding hands on their 50th anniversary, and a heavy white envelope sealed tightly with red wax. On the front, written in his steady, familiar cursive, were 5 distinct sentences. "Open only if something feels deeply wrong with your mother before your 18th birthday. Call David Caldwell immediately." I sat down heavily on the edge of my mattress, staring at those words. I didn't break the wax seal that afternoon, not yet. I simply held the envelope in my lap, turning it over in my trembling fingers, staring at my grandfather's handwriting until the dark ink blurred before my eyes. Grandpa Harold had been dead for a year and a half, yet even from the grave, he had known. He had possessed enough foresight and deep concern to place a concealed weapon inside a cedar box, praying that I would be perceptive enough to find it when the time was right. From the floor below, I heard the faint, distinct crinkle of heavy paper being carefully shuffled and folded over the kitchen island. I heard my mother's voice pitched into an unusually low, secretive whisper, followed by her new husband Mark's deeper, grumbling tone. I couldn't make out the specific words, but I didn't need to. I placed the envelope back inside the cedar box, closed the lid securely, walked downstairs, and poured myself a glass of tap water. I said absolutely nothing about the kitchen light still burning at 10:30 p.m., when my mother was supposed to be asleep in bed. Looking back, that sealed envelope was the very first time someone had handed me a key to my own liberation. I just hadn't completely recognized the lock it belonged to yet. My biological father had died when I was only 10 years old. His name was Gregory Everett. He was a gentle, quiet man who drove a battered silver Ford Ranger and smelled faintly of sawdust and peppermint. On a fog-shrouded morning in November of 2018, he departed for a routine delivery run up Route 30 and simply never came back. There was dense fog on the highway, an oncoming semi-truck that lost control on the slick asphalt, and a state trooper standing on our front porch an hour later holding his wide-brimmed hat against his chest. My mother wept hysterically for exactly 1 calendar week. Then, on the 8th day, she dried her eyes, put on her makeup, and actively began browsing online real estate listings for a home with a larger, modern kitchen. She remarried less than 2 years later. Her new husband was Mark Hollis, a loud, boisterous independent contractor who drove a massive, gleaming pickup truck, possessed an unnaturally booming laugh, and brought along his teenage daughter from his first marriage, Skylar, who was 2 years younger than me and promptly moved into the bedroom directly across the hall. Living under my mother's roof taught me 3 fundamental survival rules very quickly. Rule number 1, my mother ruthlessly punished genuine tears. If I cried over my father's memory, or expressed sadness, she labeled it dramatic and attention-seeking. She would let out an exasperated sigh, grab her wine glass, and retreat to the front porch to escape my negativity. Rule number 2, my mother equally punished genuine joy. If I laughed too loudly or acted overly excited about an achievement, she accused me of showing off and craving the spotlight. She would narrow her sharp blue eyes and murmur, "Quinn, please use your inside voice. Have some modesty." Rule number 3, the only completely safe emotional setting in our house was absolute flatness. So, I went flat. I went completely quiet. By the time I was 12 years old, I had entirely stopped spending my personal feelings in front of her. I hoarded my emotions, saving them exclusively for quiet afternoons on Grandma Margaret's sunlit porch, hours spent helping Grandpa Harold tend his tomato vines, or deep within the pages of library novels where fictional characters were actually permitted to feel things out loud without penalty. My mother foolishly assumed my quietness was a sign of total, submissive obedience. It wasn't. My quietness simply meant I was watching her every move. My quietness meant I was meticulously remembering every single detail. In our household, emotional expression was treated like currency, and I had completely closed my bank account by middle school. 8 years later, when my mother slid that manila folder across the breakfast table, she was destined to discover just how carefully I had been keeping track of her debts. Dinner inside the Hollis household ran on a rigid, military schedule. At precisely 6:30 p.m., Mark would enter through the mudroom door connected to the garage, kicking his dust-covered work boots off in the laundry room, while bringing in the heavy scents of joint compound, diesel fuel, and stale truck air. He would toss his heavy keys onto the granite counter, the keys to his Ford F-350, which always made a loud, intentional clatter. He would inevitably grumble about a subcontractor, who had bailed on a job site, a bathroom renovation in Conestoga that had hidden mold behind the drywall, or a local building inspector, who was demanding a bribe. My mother would pour his large glass of red wine before he even had to ask. Then Skylar would talk. Skylar was encouraged to talk constantly. On one particular Sunday evening in late March, Skylar had just received her early decision college acceptance email from Bucknell University, an elite private school costing upwards of $65,000 a year in tuition alone before books and housing. Mark proudly raised his glass in a grand toast, booming, "That's my brilliant girl." My mother gently patted Skylar's wrist, offering a sweet, reassuring smile. "We will figure out the financial details, sweetie. Don't you worry your pretty little head about the cost." Skylar offered a subtle, triumphant glance across the table in my direction. I was busy cutting a piece of roasted chicken on my plate, keeping my eyes fixed downward. "I received my acceptance email from Penn State yesterday," I stated in a flat, completely even voice. "Main campus in State College." A sudden, awkward silence descended upon the dining room. My mother took a delicate sip of her wine and murmured, "Oh, that's very nice, sweetheart." Mark grunted, taking a long swallow from his glass without looking up. "College is mostly a scam anyway," he muttered casually. "The real money is in the skilled trades. But whatever floats your boat." He didn't offer a toast. My mother quickly offered her rehearsed, charitable committee smile. "Quinn, we will sit down and discuss your higher education future closer to your 18th birthday." That specific phrase echoed in the quiet room, "closer to your birthday." She had uttered it 3 times in February and twice already in March. To an outsider, it might have sounded like a mother planning a milestone celebration. To me, it sounded like an administrative execution appointment. Mark topped off his wine glass and added, his tone as casual as a weather report, "Family money ought to stay within the family, Quinn. not sitting locked up in some stranger's legal vault. My mother instantly shot him a razor-sharp glare, the sharp, dangerous kind of look that clearly communicated "shut your mouth right now." I simply kept cutting my chicken. I was paying very close attention. My grandmother Margaret had passed away when I was 14 after a long, brutal battle with breast cancer. She had fought it bravely twice, but the second time, her body simply gave out. On the final afternoon of her life, while sitting beside her hospice bed, she took my small hand in her frail, trembling fingers and whispered, "You are a deeply good, strong girl, Quinn. Don't you ever let anyone in this world convince you otherwise." I didn't shed a single tear inside that sterile hospital room. My mother was standing near the door, watching me closely for any sign of drama. Instead, I let my grief explode an hour later in the passenger seat of Grandpa Harold's old Buick parked in the hospital lot. Grandpa didn't tell me to hush, nor did he let out an annoyed sigh. He simply rested his large, calloused hand on my shoulder and said gently, "Let it all out, Peanut. Cry as much as you need to." Grandpa Harold managed to hold on for 2 more years after her death. He became increasingly quiet, not with bitter sadness, but with a peaceful, evening stillness. During the summer I turned 16, I moved into his spare bedroom for July and August, reading his favorite historical novels aloud while he rested in his armchair, helping him water his prized heirloom tomatoes, and cooking his morning eggs precisely the way he loved them, hard yolks, plenty of creamery butter, and a pinch of black pepper. He passed away peacefully in his sleep one Tuesday morning in September, at 78 years old. At his funeral, my mother wore an immaculate navy blue dress, and managed to produce tears at precisely the socially acceptable volume for a grieving daughter. Mark stood near the back doors of the church, covertly checking sports scores on his phone. The formal reading of the will occurred 2 weeks later inside a local law office. My grandfather had established an irrevocable trust in my name, a financial inheritance that caused Mark's jaw to drop in total shock when the numbers were read aloud. The total portfolio was valued at approximately $680,000, comprised of stable blue-chip stocks, liquid cash accounts, and the substantial proceeds from a commercial parcel of land Grandpa had sold in Bucks County years prior. The legal terms of the trust were exceptionally straightforward. The assets belonged exclusively to me, but I could not touch the principal capital until my 18th birthday, at which point full, unrestricted beneficial ownership would legally transfer into my hands. The designated trustee listed on the official court paperwork was an independent attorney named David Caldwell. Stapled to the back of the trust summary was a handwritten note from Grandpa Harold containing 6 simple words meant for me: "Your choice, your life. Love, Grandpa." My mother read those 6 words with an expression I will never forget for the rest of my life, not an expression of motherly pride or bittersweet remembrance, but a cold, calculating look of pure financial ambition. Grandpa Harold had left me a secure door out of her house, but my mother was already quietly hiring a locksmith to change the deadbolt. 6 months before my 18th birthday arrived, a man in a tailored grey suit began making regular, unannounced appearances at our house. He showed up every Wednesday afternoon at precisely 4:30 p.m., driving a sleek, charcoal-colored Lexus featuring an ugly, custom license plate frame that read Briggs Associates, Estate Planning, Lancaster. He would remain inside our dining room for an hour and 15 minutes, invariably departing with a thick leather binder tucked beneath his arm. Whenever I casually inquired about his identity, my mother's story continuously shifted. First, she claimed he was an insurance adjuster reviewing our homeowner's policy. A few weeks later, she claimed he was a personal financial planner helping her organize her retirement. Eventually, she casually dismissed him as an old acquaintance of Mark's. Her explanations changed constantly, but the heavy leather binder he carried never did. One snowy afternoon in mid-January, I arrived home unexpectedly early from my part-time job at the local public library because a severe winter storm had forced an early closure. Pushing quietly through the mudroom door, the rustle of papers echoing from the kitchen stopped me in my tracks. My mother's voice carried clearly into the hallway. The second she signs the primary documents on her birthday, the rest of the asset transfers are just routine administrative paperwork. Mark grumbled in response, and what if she gets stubborn and hesitates? My mother let out a short, dry, dismissive laugh. Quinn? Please. She'll sign whatever I put in front of her. She always does. I stood motionless on the mudroom rug, my winter boots caked with melting snow, listening to my heart hammer against my ribs. Then, taking a slow, deep breath, I intentionally slammed the exterior door loud enough to shatter the secrecy. Mom? I'm home early. The library closed due to the blizzard. I called out cheerfully. I heard the frantic, chaotic rustle of papers being swept off the table. When I walked into the warm kitchen seconds later, the granite island was completely bare, and my mother was offering me her bright, perfectly relaxed smile. Snow day, huh, sweetie? Let me fix you a warm cup of hot cocoa. That sounds great, thanks Mom, I replied smoothly. But as she turned her back to grab a mug, my eyes caught sight of a thick folder protruding from beneath her purse on the counter, a cream-colored, embossed document bearing the official letterhead, Briggs Associates, Family Wealth Restructuring. Skylar walked into the kitchen behind me, glanced at the counter, and blurted out, "Is that the legal paperwork for Quinn's inheritance money?" My mother's smile froze in place. Mark immediately barked, "Skylar, go upstairs to your room right now." Skylar rolled her eyes and retreated up the stairs. My mother handed me the warm mug, patting my shoulder gently. "You are such a sweet, good girl, Quinny." I took a sip of the cocoa, looked her straight in the eye, and smiled. "Thanks, Mom." That was the exact, defining second I officially ceased being the naive, ignorant daughter they assumed I was. I simply chose not to inform a single soul that I had crossed the line into total awareness. That following Friday afternoon, I walked to Willow Creek Park with my grandfather's sealed envelope tucked safely inside the pocket of my oversized hoodie. The public park was completely deserted, the winter sky the heavy gray color of wet concrete. I sat down on a cold wooden bench near the frozen pond and used my thumbnail to carefully break the old red wax seal. Inside lay a single page of heavy ivory paper, covered in my grandfather's neat, deliberate handwriting. "Peanut, if you are reading this letter, it means my deepest suspicions have proven correct and something has gone terribly wrong with your mother's intentions. I have suspected her true financial character for a very long time. I never wished to poison your young heart against her, but I could not depart this world without providing you with a secure door to open for your own protection. David Caldwell has served as my personal attorney and trusted friend for over 30 years. He knows every detail of my estate and your trust. He is currently waiting for your call. You possess the absolute legal and moral right to protect yourself, Quinn. You have the right to choose your own destiny, and I have total faith that you will choose wisely. All my love, Grandpa Harold." Below his signature, written in dark, bold block numbers, was a direct phone line with a 717 area code. I stared at those digits for a long time, the cold wind nipping at my cheeks. My hands were freezing, but my eyes remained completely dry. I pulled out my phone, dialed the digits, and pressed the receiver to my ear. A receptionist answered almost immediately. "Caldwell Estate Law. This is Paula speaking." "Hello," I said, keeping my voice steady. "My name is Quinn Everett. My grandfather was Harold Everett. He instructed me in a private letter to call Mr. Caldwell directly." The line went quiet for half a second. "Please hold one moment, sweetie." A soft electronic chime clicked, followed instantly by a deep, warm, baritone voice. "Quinn? This is David Caldwell. I have been patiently waiting for your call for a very long time." I couldn't form a verbal response for a moment, my throat tightening with raw emotion. Your grandfather and I discussed this exact scenario on multiple occasions, Quinn, the attorney continued gently. I am so immensely relieved you reached out to me. Can you manage to travel to my main office in Lancaster next week? Tell your mother you have an in-person college financial aid consultation. Yes, I answered without hesitation. I can do that. Excellent, Mr. Caldwell replied firmly. And Quinn, listen to me very carefully. Do not change a single detail about your daily behavior at home. Do not alter your facial expressions, do not break your routine, and do not utter a single suspicious word to your mother or Mark. Let them believe everything is proceeding according to their plan. For the very first time in my 18 years of life, an adult was speaking to me with total respect, treating me like a capable person fully capable of handling the dangerous truth. David Caldwell's law office was located on the second floor of a historic brick building on Prince Street in downtown Lancaster. The room featured a warm green banker's lamp on a massive mahogany desk, wall-to-wall shelves lined with thick Pennsylvania legal volumes, and a large potted fern in the corner that he clearly forgot to water regularly. He stood up the moment I walked through the door, a tall, distinguished man in his late 60s with thick white hair, kind, intelligent eyes, and an impeccably tailored charcoal suit. Please, sit down, Quinn. Can I offer you some hot tea? Water is fine, thank you, I replied, sitting in the leather armchair facing his desk. He walked me through the legal mechanics of my inheritance with extraordinary patience, utilizing clear, precise language, and writing down key legal terms on a yellow pad so I could follow along visually. Trust beneficial interest. Fiduciary duty. Spendthrift clause. Irrevocable trust. At precisely midnight on your 18th birthday, Quinn, Mr. Caldwell explained, resting his hands on the desk, the substantial assets your grandfather left you will legally transition into your absolute control. You will face 3 distinct legal options. You can maintain the existing trust structure, you can completely dissolve it and claim the liquid cash, or you can formally execute a brand new, modern trust framework that we can design together right here today. What specific course of action do you recommend, Mr. Caldwell? I asked directly. I strongly advise executing a brand new, irrevocable trust managed by a professional corporate trustee, he answered without hesitation. I regularly partner with Midland Trust Services, a highly reputable institution in Harrisburg. You will be designated as the absolute sole beneficiary, with clear mandatory distributions allocated for your higher education, housing, healthcare, and living expenses. Most importantly, your mother, Mark Hollis, and Skylar Hollis will be explicitly, permanently excluded from acting as trustees, co-trustees, or beneficiaries under any circumstances. And what does the word irrevocable mean in practical terms? I inquired. It means that once your signature is placed on the final documents, Caldwell explained gravely, not even you can legally dismantle the structure, or surrender the capital. That is its primary strength. It shields your financial future from external manipulation, emotional guilt-tripping, and your own potential moments of personal weakness. I thought deeply about those words. I pictured my mother's fake, sweet smile, her tightening grip on my wrist, and her persistent, predatory phrases about family unity. I looked up at the attorney and said firmly, "Let's do it." Mr. Caldwell offered a grim nod. He looked down at his legal pad, adjusted his glasses, and sighed. Quinn. Before we finalize our draft, there is a critical piece of intelligence I must disclose regarding your mother's private legal representation. The dying fern in the corner rustled softly as the office HVAC system kicked on. Outside the window, a delivery truck rumbled past on the street below. Tell me everything, I said. Caldwell folded his hands together. Your mother has been working closely with an attorney named Lance Briggs. Briggs is a notorious local estate lawyer, who has been formally reprimanded twice by the Pennsylvania State Bar Association for unethical practices. He specializes in what my profession politely refers to as aggressive family wealth reallocation. Which means what, exactly? Which means he regularly drafts highly predatory legal instruments that reputable attorneys would refuse to touch, Caldwell stated plainly. He pulled a manila folder from his desk drawer and slid it across the wood toward me. I could read the bold header on the top page upside down: Everett Family Financial Unification Asset Realignment Agreement. My full legal name was printed clearly in the subheader: Quinn Marie Everett. A former paralegal, who recently departed Briggs's firm, was deeply disturbed by the documents being drafted for your mother, Caldwell revealed. She quietly forwarded copies of the preliminary drafts to my office for review. What does the agreement actually do to my inheritance? I asked, my fingers brushing the edge of the paper. If executed, it would instantly designate your mother as a permanent co-trustee over your inheritance, Caldwell explained, his voice cold with professional outrage. It grants her a durable, unrestricted financial power of attorney over all your personal bank accounts, and it legally transfers a massive 60% chunk of your trust principal directly into a private holding company titled Hollis Everett Holdings LLC, an entity managed exclusively by Mark Hollis. I flipped to the final signature page. The document was predated February 28, a full 2 months prior to my 18th birthday, while I was still legally a 17-year-old minor. I looked up at the attorney, my brow furrowed. I'm still a minor on February 28. How could that even be legal? Precisely, Caldwell nodded grimly. Under Pennsylvania law, executing that specific agreement while you are 17 would require your mother's formal signature, as your legal parent and guardian alongside yours. That was their master plan, Quinn, to utilize maternal authority and psychological pressure to force your signature while you were still legally a minor, permanently locking up your grandfather's money before you ever reached the legal age of 18. I closed the folder very carefully. My hands were remarkably still, a calm, icy composure that surprised even me. They spent 4 months drafting this, I stated quietly. 4 months that we have documented evidence of, Caldwell affirmed. 4 months of your mother acting like a loving parent at the dinner table, while secretly constructing a legal trap to strip away your entire future. I looked the veteran attorney straight in the eye and said, then let's make sure my trap is built much better than hers. I drove home from David Caldwell's law office in Lancaster, adhering strictly to the speed limit, keeping my hands positioned precisely at 10 and 2 on the steering wheel, my mind operating with a cold, terrifying clarity. I walked into the house at 5:30 p.m. My mother was standing at the stove in her yellow apron, stirring a pot of chicken pot pie, my absolute favorite childhood meal, a dish she only prepared when she wanted something major from me. The moment I entered the kitchen, she turned around and offered a brilliant, affectionate smile. How did your college financial aid consultation go, sweetie? It went really well, Mom, I lied effortlessly, sitting down at the kitchen island. Very informative. She placed a steaming bowl of pot pie directly in front of me, patting my hand gently. I was thinking, Quinny, for your 18th birthday on April 16th, we ought to do something exceptionally special as a family. Just the 4 of us, a quiet family breakfast, hot pancakes, your favorite. That sounds lovely, Mom, I replied, keeping my face completely vacant of suspicion. Mark's loud voice drifted in from the living room over the blare of the television. Yeah, a nice family breakfast. So we can discuss some important grown-up matters. Skylar walked into the kitchen, grabbing a soda from the fridge, asking nonchalantly, what grown-up matters? My mother's smile didn't waver for a fraction of a second as she smoothed down her apron. Oh, nothing for you to worry about, honey. Just some long-term family financial planning. Skylar rolled her eyes and left the room. I took a bite of the pot pie. It tasted exactly as it always had, rich, savory, and entirely hollow. I smiled at my mother and said, pancakes sound wonderful, Mom. I was playing the exact role of the quiet, clueless daughter she expected me to be, she simply had no idea that her quiet daughter was now backed by an elite estate attorney. We met twice more in secret at David Caldwell's office before my 18th birthday arrived. I used routine cover stories, a library research project, a high school guidance meeting, a simulated college campus tour. Caldwell walked me through every line of the new trust documents with surgical precision. When it came time to select an official title for the new irrevocable trust, Caldwell asked, "Most clients choose to name trusts after themselves. What would you like to officially title this entity, Quinn?" "Call it the Margaret Trust," I answered instantly, honoring the grandmother, who had taught me what unconditional love truly meant. We built the legal structure brick by brick. Corporate trustee designated exclusively as Midland Trust Services in Harrisburg, sole beneficiary named as Quinn Marie Everett, and any direct biological descendants, and a permanent, ironclad exclusion clause explicitly barring Caroline Everett Hollis, Mark Hollis, Skylar Hollis, or any commercial entity connected to them from ever serving as trustees, co-trustees, or beneficiaries under any circumstances. Mandatory distributions were hard-coded strictly for my university tuition, reasonable housing, medical needs, and essential living expenses, shielded by an unbreakable spendthrift clause that rendered the capital completely immune to outside creditors, family pressure, or predatory legal claims. Caldwell looked me in the eye and reminded me, "Remember, Quinn, an irrevocable trust protects you from them, but it also protects you from your own emotional vulnerabilities. 5 years from now, if your mother cries and begs, you will not physically be able to dismantle this structure to give her a dime." "I know," I answered without a second of hesitation. "That is precisely why I want it." We scheduled the official digital execution of the Margaret Trust for 12:01 a.m. on April 16th, the exact minute I legally turned 18 years old, utilizing an online notarization portal. A corporate representative from Midland Trust, and Caldwell as my legal counsel. On the Sunday evening preceding my birthday, my mother prepared a lavish pot roast dinner. Over the meal, I casually floated an innocent-sounding question, "Mom, what is the actual difference between an independent legal trust and a joint family account?" My mother instantly illuminated with predatory enthusiasm. "Oh, Quinny, independent trusts are horribly complicated and dangerous. They are managed by greedy corporate strangers who drain all your money with hidden legal fees. Family accounts are infinitely better, everything is kept safe in loving family hands." Mark nodded aggressively, adding, "Family money stays with family, Quinn. Not with some corporate suit up in Harrisburg." It was the specific word corporate that instantly exposed him. I had never mentioned the word corporate, or Harrisburg to either of them, but Lance Briggs clearly had during the secret planning sessions. Skylar looked up from her plate and casually muttered, "Mom told me the inheritance money was supposed to belong to all of us anyway." The entire dining room went deathly silent. My mother's fork froze mid-air. Mark barked loudly, "Skylar, eat your dinner and keep your mouth shut." My mother quickly recovered, offering a strained smile. "Skylar just means our family operates as a tight-knit team, sweetie. That's all." "Of course, Mom," I said, passing the gravy boat with a serene smile, maintaining the flawless facade of the naive daughter while taking mental notes. 2 days before my birthday, my mother abruptly announced that she had reserved a private dining room at the Willow Creek Country Club for an early birthday dinner. 15 guests were invited, including our local pastor, Mark's commercial business partner, and several prominent members of my mother's charitable committee. During dessert, my mother stood up, tapped her wine glass with a silver knife, and delivered her emotional toast, "To my sweet, brave daughter Quinn, who is going to make such extraordinarily wise, mature financial decisions for our family's future tomorrow." Everyone raised their glasses. Sitting 3 tables away in the quiet main dining room was a man in a navy blazer eating a Caesar salad, a mid-50s attorney with thinning hair, and a heavy leather briefcase leaning against his chair. He caught Mark's eye across the room and offered a subtle, professional nod. It was Lance Briggs. My mother's crooked lawyer was already present at my birthday dinner, salivating over an 18-year-old girl's inheritance 24 hours before she even woke up. On the night of April 15th, at 11:47 p.m., I locked my bedroom door, opened my laptop on my desk, and logged into the secure portal. At 11:52 p.m., David Caldwell joined the encrypted Zoom call from his office. At 11:54 p.m., Priya Desai, a corporate officer from Midland Trust Services, joined the meeting. At 11:56 p.m., a licensed Pennsylvania state notary verified my official state identification card. At 11:59 p.m., Caldwell said, "Are you fully prepared, Quinn?" "I am," I answered. At 12:01 a.m. on April 16, 2026, I typed my full legal signature across the digital execution line, Quinn Marie Everett. The notary formally verified the signature. Priya Desai verified the corporate acceptance. At 12:03 a.m., Priya announced, initiating direct asset transfer from the original probate account. At 12:04 a.m., she confirmed, transfer verified and completed. Total funded capital, $681,412.90. The Margaret Trust is now fully funded, fully active, and legally irrevocable. Caldwell looked straight into his camera lens and said, "Happy 18th birthday, Quinn. You are officially a free woman." I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 6 long months. I closed my laptop, climbed into bed, and slept more deeply than I had in 8 years. The next morning, April 16th, I awoke at 7:30 a.m. I showered, dressed in a comfortable cashmere sweater, jeans, and my grandmother's gold stud earrings, and walked downstairs into the kitchen at 7:45 a.m. The room smelled of freshly cooked bacon and pancakes. My mother was standing at the stove in her pink quilted robe, her hair meticulously styled. The second I stepped into the room, she turned around and enveloped me in a tight, dramatic hug that lasted 3 seconds longer than usual. "Happy 18th birthday, my sweet girl." She beamed. Mark was sitting at the island in a polo shirt, while Skylar sat in her pajamas with her phone propped against the juice pitcher. Sitting on the granite counter directly beside my mother's coffee mug was a thick manila folder, not hidden, not disguised, but resting openly like a piece of birthday mail. My mother set a plate containing a stack of 3 pancakes, with lit candles in front of me. "Make a wish, Quinny." I leaned over and blew out the candles, silently wishing that my grandfather was watching from somewhere above. My mother allowed me to take exactly 2 bites of pancake before folding her hands over the island, adopting her warm, charitable committee tone. "Honey, now that you are officially 18 years old, there is a small administrative matter we need to take care of regarding your grandfather's old estate." She slid the heavy manila folder 3 inches across the granite counter until it rested directly against my plate. "It's nothing complicated, sweetie, just some routine family wealth paperwork Mark's attorney put together so we can manage everything wisely as a united family." Mark chimed in, "Just basic organizational structure, Quinn." I looked at the folder, then at my mother. "May I read it first, Mom?" "Of course, sweetheart. Take all the time you need," she replied smoothly. I opened the cover page. Printed in bold black lettering was the title, Everett Family Financial Unification Asset Realignment Agreement. It designated Quinn Marie Everett as the principal, Caroline Everett Hollis as the successor co-trustee, and Mark J. Hollis as attorney-in-fact, complete with signature lines predated for execution. I turned the page, methodically reading every single paragraph. Page 2. Durable financial power of attorney granted unconditionally to Caroline Everett Hollis. Page 5. Absolute assignment of 60% of trust principal to Hollis Everett Holdings LLC. Page 9. Formal acknowledgement of family financial priorities, including mandatory tuition coverage for Skylar and Hollis at Bucknell University. I traced every line with my index finger, taking my time. 2 minutes passed in total silence. My mother's cheerful smile began to crack at the corners. By the 4-minute mark, she tapped her coffee cup twice against the counter, a sharp, anxious habit. At the 5-minute mark, Mark snapped impatiently, "Quinn, for heaven's sake, you don't need to analyze every single line. It's just standard legal paperwork. My guy is standing by right now to notarize it." I looked up from the page, my voice dangerously calm. "Mark, a second ago, my mother called it Mark's attorney. Now you are calling him my guy. Which one is it?" Mark blinked, caught off guard. "What? And how long have you two been working with Lance Briggs?" I asked, turning my gaze to my mother. The name Lance Briggs landed inside that bright kitchen like an explosive shell. Mark's jaw instantly went slack. My mother's face drained of color as she stammered, "Sweetheart, we haven't even told you the attorney's name yet." "I know," I stated flatly. "That is precisely what I am pointing out." I flipped to the footer on page 11, pointing to the fine print. Generated December 14th, 2025. Briggs Associates Document Version 4.3. You two have been drafting legal documents to seize my inheritance for 4 full months behind my back, since I was 17 years old. My mother tried desperately to recover her composure, adopting a wounded, motherly tone. "Quinny, honey, we were simply planning for your financial future. You are far too young to understand how complex taxes and asset management are. There are financial predators out there who will prey on a young girl with money." "Mom, I am not refusing to understand," I said softly. "I simply want our official family attorney to explain these specific clauses to me before I sign anything. We don't need David Caldwell for this." My mother blurted out, her voice cracking with sheer panic. "Lance Briggs can explain everything far better." I sat completely still, letting the heavy silence fill the room. "Mom," I whispered, "I never told you the name of my grandfather's attorney." My mother froze. Her mouth opened, closed, and opened again, but zero sound came out. Her eyes darted wildly around the room, as she realized she had just walked directly into her own trap. I must have remembered his name from years ago, when your grandfather passed away." She stammered frantically. "Grandpa Harold died 18 months ago, Mom," I corrected her coldly. "And I have never uttered David Caldwell's name inside this house." Mark slammed his fist onto the granite island, his face turning purple with rage. "You arrogant little bitch. You think you're so damn clever, don't you?" Skylar shrank back in her chair, whispering in shock, "Wait. Mom, what is going on here?" "Nothing is going on, Skylar." My mother snapped, her hands shaking uncontrollably as she clutched the edge of the counter. At that exact second, my phone, resting face up on the island beside my plate, began to vibrate loudly. The illuminated caller ID displayed 2 clear words, "David Caldwell, Esquire." The time was 9:03 a.m. My mother looked at the phone screen, and the absolute last drop of color vanished from her face. She looked as though she was staring at a ghost. I picked up the phone, looked directly into my mother's terrified eyes, and asked, "Do you mind if I put our attorney on speakerphone?" Mark half stood from his chair, roaring, "Don't you dare answer that line." "I think I will," I replied serenely. I tapped the green icon and activated the speakerphone, setting the device in the exact center of the island between the manila folder and the maple syrup bottle. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell. You are on speakerphone. I am sitting at the kitchen table with my mother, Mark Hollis, and my sister Skylar." David Caldwell's deep, authoritative voice filled the quiet kitchen like a physical presence. "Good morning, Quinn. Happy 18th birthday. I hope I am not interrupting your family breakfast." "Not at all, Mr. Caldwell," I answered smoothly. "We were just having a very intense conversation regarding my grandfather's money." "I see. Excellent timing then, Caldwell replied calmly. I am calling to formally confirm, for the record, that the complete asset transfer we initiated at midnight was successfully executed at 12:04 a.m. The Margaret Trust is now fully funded with $681,412.90 under the sole management of Midland Trust Services, as corporate trustee. The structure is legally active, binding, and entirely irrevocable. The sound that occurred in our kitchen was a complete, devastating vacuum of air. My mother's silver fork dropped from her hand, clattering against her plate. Mark collapsed back into his chair, his hands curling into tight fists. Skylar gasped, "Wait, what trust?" Caldwell continued seamlessly over the speaker. To clarify for anyone present in the room, the Margaret Trust holds all assets left by the late Harold Everett. Under the binding terms executed by Quinn upon reaching her legal majority at midnight, these funds can strictly be disbursed for Quinn's higher education, housing, and personal welfare by an independent corporate trustee. No family member, parent, or third-party entity can ever access, alter, or claim a single cent of this capital. This is insane. This is illegal. Mark screamed at the phone. Caldwell's voice dropped into an icy, professional register. Mr. Hollis, I strongly advise you to exercise extreme caution regarding what you say on an open line. Furthermore, I am formally documenting for the record that my office has submitted a comprehensive complaint to the Pennsylvania State Disciplinary Board regarding Lance Briggs's conduct in preparing the Family Financial Unification Agreement, a document explicitly drafted to defraud a minor child under the guise of parental authority. Mr. Briggs was officially served with the disciplinary notice yesterday afternoon at 4 p.m. I doubt he will be answering your phone calls today. My mother looked down at the manila folder resting on the counter. It now looked small, pathetic, and utterly useless. Quinn. Quinny, please, she sobbed, real tears finally spilling down her cheeks as the full reality of her total defeat crushed her. I looked at her with complete emotional detachment. Did you honestly believe I was too stupid to notice what you were doing for 4 months, Mom? She couldn't answer. She simply buried her face in her hands. Skylar stared at her mother in total horror, realizing that the tuition money she had been promised at Bucknell was derived entirely from an attempted theft of my inheritance. Caldwell spoke one final time over the speaker. Quinn, your aunt, Elizabeth Everett, is currently parked at the end of your driveway waiting to pick you up. You are free to leave whenever you are ready. Thank you, Mr. Caldwell. I will see you soon, I said, disconnecting the call. I stood up from the island, picked up the manila folder containing her fraudulent agreement, grabbed my phone, and put on my jacket. I looked at Skylar, who was sitting paralyzed in her chair, and said gently, Skylar, you are 16 years old. None of this was your fault, and I don't hold any bitterness toward you. Call me when you turn 18. I turned my back on my weeping mother and Mark's silent, purple-faced rage, walked down the hallway past the family photos that had never included me, stepped out the front door into the pale April sunlight, and walked down the driveway toward Aunt Beth's waiting car. The fallout from that morning swept through our small town of Willow Creek like an unstoppable wave. Within weeks, the Pennsylvania Disciplinary Board issued a formal 3-year suspension of Lance Briggs's legal license, permanently ruining his estate planning practice. Stripped of the anticipated inheritance capital, Mark's commercial construction business collapsed under the weight of overdue equipment liens, resulting in the repossession of his trucks and his eventual departure from my mother's life. Facing severe financial strain and public humiliation, my mother was forced to sell the house, take on a modest administrative job, and move into a small apartment, while Skylar enrolled at a local state college on affordable tuition. I moved into Aunt Beth's guest room in Pittsburgh, where I spent a peaceful, empowering summer preparing for university. In September, I moved into my dorm room at Penn State University, fully funded by the Margaret Trust, majoring in constitutional law with the ultimate goal of becoming an estate advocate for vulnerable heirs. I never returned to my mother's house, Nor did I ever surrender another second of my life to her toxic demands. Standing in the quiet sanctuary of the university library a year later, watching the autumn leaves drift past the window, I finally understood the ultimate lesson my grandfather had taught me. A daughter's silence is never a sign of weakness. It is simply the quiet, patient gathering of strength before she reclaims her life.